Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. The art world loves its labels and categories, but my guest today defies all of them. Jeremy Deller is a visual artist who can't paint, can't draw, and professes no great technical skill. And yet he's widely regarded as one of the most important artists in Britain today. He uses images, objects, words, and real people to present a portrait of the modern world, from the factory floor to the Iraq War. What is at the heart of his creative vision? Jeremy Deller, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
I just talked about how difficult it is to label you, to pin you down. How would you describe the art that you do?
That's a very good question. It's art. It's art. It's conceptual art. It's based on ideas, but it's art that uses everything that's around it. It's not traditional, but most people who I work with have no problem with me being an artist when I tell them I'm an artist, because they understand they're doing something interesting and maybe creative. So it's a form of art, but it's not traditional.
It's interesting you talk about the people you work with. It seems one of the keys to what you do is collaboration. Yeah. You're working with other people to do something collective.
Yes. Well, I don't have traditional art skills, as you said in the introduction, so very kindly
you didn't find that cruel, but
no,
you've always made a point of saying...
Well, I can't... I mean, everyone can draw and everyone can paint, but I just can't do it very well, I think. And I wasn't encouraged to at school. If anything, I was actively discouraged.
Is it true that you were sort of chucked out of art class when you were a teenager?
Yeah, well, I think it might have been 12, it might have been pre-teenager. My art teacher and I didn't see eye to eye, and it just wasn't working. I think that's how you put it. And I went to pottery, which was great. But so from the age of 12, I really didn't do any drawing or painting. But I loved art, and I loved being around art. So I always knew I would do something with art or around it. It was really something from my childhood, was something very special to me. So.
There's something about your life story that I found fascinating, because, as you say, you loved art, but you were not a drawer, a painter. But when you went to college, you chose to study art history.
Yes. And
then, almost by chance, it seems, you met Andy Warhol.
Well, it wasn't so much by chance. It was planned. I knew that he was going to be at this opening in 1986, just the year before he died. And I just thought, I have to go and be in the same room as this person, because he was such a hero to me. As he is to a lot of young people who are into art, Warhol is really your first point of contact with contemporary art and the ideas of contemporary art. So I just thought, I've got to be in the same room with him. And he ended up signing some things I had, and then one of his entourage chatted to me, and then I met him after that.
What strikes me about that is that Warhol was a man who played with the commercialization of art, the commodification of art. You know, his message was, in a sense, that there's a very grey area between art and sort of product.
Well, he almost invented it. Mm. I mean, he really was the first to do this, and he set a real standard for other contemporary artists, for good and bad, I have to say.
Well, that's the thing, because you've always made a point of saying that you do not want to get to a point in your artistic life where you're not entirely focused on producing sort of unique creative work, just becoming a reproducer.
Yeah, becoming a factory, effectively.
Yeah, exactly. And then you say you love Warhol, he's your favourite.
Well, how come? It's a good point, but I think because he had a very strong idea and he pursued it, and also he was true to his idea, but also he had other ideas. You know, he was into filmmaking, music and publishing, so he didn't see any differentiation between fine art and making a magazine or making film, or being in an advert, or working with musicians. And that's very attractive.
So he opened up for you the concept of art being about much more than paint on canvas or charcoal drawing or anything like that.
About freedom, really. When you went to the factory and you walked around the rooms and you saw some people making a TV show, some people putting a magazine together, you realised he's created this world for himself. And it's all about freedom and possibility, and it was very exciting.
And you came home, and I'm sort of jumping ahead in time a little bit, but again, a key moment for me reading about your biography was this decision you took in your 20s, and when you were playing around with the idea of what art is, what it can be, to open up your bedroom in your parents' house as an exhibit for the local community?
Well, it's actually more extreme than that. My parents went on holiday and I opened up the whole house. I made an exhibition in the house.
With their permission?
Without their permission. My mother only found out later when she opened a book and saw a picture of our toilet in the book. And she was horrified because the seat was left up.
I suspect she didn't regard that as art.
Parents are very proud of their children, obviously, and the fact that I've been successful at something after years of really not knowing what was going to happen with me. You know, I lived at home till I was 31. They had no idea really what was going on. I sort of had an idea, but they were totally mystified by my activities. And now it's very clear that it's okay. So they're very happy.
I just wonder about that anything goes idea.
Yes.
I mean, we've just had Grayson Perry, another successful British artist of the day, talking about what art is. He says pretty much, you know, anything can be art, but that doesn't mean anything is art.
Quite. I mean...
So how do we define the difference between, you know, taking a toilet and it being a toilet,
Yes.
and then putting it in a different context and turning it into a piece of art?
This is the big question, Steve, which not even I can answer thoroughly. I think it's in your mind. If you want to accept that as an artwork in your mind, as an individual, then so be it. If you don't want to, that's fine. You don't have to have it sort of rammed down your throat, as it were. So I don't... If people don't like what I do or don't think it's art, that's fine, because it's out there and it exists. The label can be very misleading and can upset people as well, I think. But you have to remember that toilet, wherever it was put, there's ideas behind it. There's like a wealth of ideas behind it. And whether you want to engage with those ideas or not is the question, really.
I want to talk to you now about perhaps the work that brought you to a much wider audience, both in Britain and around the world. That was the Battle of All Greve, and an idea you had to reenact a very important moment in British industrial relations from the 1980s. There was this really, really long-running and important battle between the government and the miners, a miners' strike. In 1984, the strike was continuing. There was a standoff around the All Greve coking plant.
Yeah.
Police moved in against the striking miners, violent clashes. You chose 17 years later to reenact it with hundreds and hundreds of sort of extras,
Yes.
some of whom I think were actual
Miners.
former miners.
Former miners with their families and reenactors, people who belong to reenactment societies. So at weekends they will dress up in Napoleonic gear or as Roman centurions or Second World War. English Civil War is a very popular reenactment society. The second most popular reenactment society is the American Civil War, so which tells you about people's interest in civil wars. So I called it the English Civil War initially, Part 2, because I saw the miners, you know, if you lived through the miners' strike, as you probably did, you would realise how divisive it was. It was almost like what a civil war might feel like. It was a very divisive time. And
it was a very divisive time, very important time in Britain for all sorts of reasons,
Yes.
including, you know, the power of Thatcher and Thatcher's ideas. I'm just struggling to see why it was necessary, why you felt, as a public schoolboy
Yes.
from the south of England,
Exactly.
that you needed to explore this, because it's not as though there weren't heaps of current affairs documentaries, journalistic books, and other material about this very conflict.
There had been. I think the thing about the strike was, after the strike, there was a lot of books. A lot of people wrote their biographies to set the record straight on their terms. A lot of villages wrote self-published pamphlets about life in the villages during what was effectively an occupation. So there's a lot of self-published material for about a year or 2 years after. Then it went very quiet. Then you had things like Billy Elliot, which was basically a romanticisation of the strike, and the strike as a backdrop for this story about dance and so on. So I wanted to make a very harsh, quite uncomfortable artwork about the miners' strike at a time when, in Britain at least, it was New Labour, everything was going to be fantastic, the art world was on the up, and I wanted to do something that was really just the exact opposite, remind ourselves of this terrible moment, really, this trauma.
Were you doing it in a spirit of anger?
Yes, I think still puzzlement and anger. You know, a lot of the things I do are really pieces of research. It's like, instead of writing a book about the miners' strike, I did that.
Yes, but if you had a spirit of anger in yourself, and this goes beyond that work, but to other works which we'll talk about in a minute, do you want to instill anger in your audience, your viewers?
That's a very good question, because a lot of people thought I was doing this reenactment as a way of healing wounds. But actually I was doing the opposite. I was doing it as a way of making people angry again, because they may have forgotten about it, or their kids didn't know about it.
So you wanted to politicise them in a way?
Absolutely, yes. I wanted to make...
But because you've said, you know, look, I'm not a big P political activist, I never want to be, that's not how I see myself.
No.
But I'm beginning to think maybe that's not entirely true.
It was a political artwork, and there's no way I can get around that. But I really wanted to make people exercised again about something. I saw it as a way of, you know, if a child gets murdered or there's some terrible kidnap or something, the police recreate a crime for the public to jog their memories and so on. I saw it as a recreation of a crime scene. And I was very much on the miners' side. I told them this because the former miners were very suspicious of me. Well, not so much, but a little bit because of the involvement of the media and of a TV station, basically, because Channel 4 filmed it. So there's still this lingering distrust of the media.
But, you know, there's so many interesting questions about this as it relates to real life and
Yes.
to art. I mean, if you say quite blatantly to me, I was on the miners' side and that was the point of my work, to tell the world about the story from the miners' point of view, where does truth sit in that? I mean, where does the sort of forensic reenactment of what actually happened sit in that?
Well, of course it wasn't a forensic reenactment.
So you were making it up?
I wished it had been.
You were prejudicial, you were biased, and you were making it up?
No, I wasn't making it up. We went to the place where it had happened, and we got the original people involved and reenactors, and we sort of made a version of it. There's no way you can recreate a 20,000 person riot. It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. But you go back there, and because you do that thing in that space, you're bringing up those questions again. And people are thinking about it, and then you make a book about it and a documentary and so on. So it just the phantoms arise again, the ghosts arise again. That's how I saw it.
Yeah, well, you are explicit about the political nature of it. And
Yes.
to bring us much more up to date now with current work, you know, you've just had this major exhibition representing Britain at the Venice Biennale.
correct.
And again, some heavily political work in that, you know, images, photographs, pictures, video, which does suggest that you are pretty angry right now about the nature of capitalism.
Well, nature of the world in general, let's say. Capitalism, maybe.
Well, for example, I mean, people who haven't seen it won't necessarily know, but, you know, you've got images imagining a popular uprising against the tax haven of Jersey.
Yes.
You've got a picture of the great socialist William Morris rising from the sea, grabbing a super yacht that
Roman Abramovich is
owned
very
by the
specifically.
billionaire. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, they're meant to be funny, actually. There's a humour there. And there's also a humour about reenacting a battle from the miners' strike. There's a comedic absurdity to it. And I wanted those big paintings to be absurd almost, but they're like Greek myths. These are Greek myths, contemporary ones. So you have Poseidon is actually William Morris, and he's destroying this yacht. It's meant to be funny and maybe slightly shocking, but it's how I look at things.
Well, we've got one illustration of the sort of wry humour that's worked into them. You've got a thing about cars, I think, and big cars in particular.
Yeah, I do actually.
So let's look at a bit of video where you've presented this film of some big SUV vehicles being crunched up by a crane, but you put it to music. Let's just have a look, and then you can explain it to me. So there we've got sort of smashed up SUVs pirouetting around with this giant mechanical claw. And I think this is part of a wider work which you've talked about being a sort of great day for cyclists.
It's called a great... It's actually... the work in question is a huge painting of a hen harrier, which is a very rare British bird, with a Range Rover. That's a Range Rover, by the way, very specifically. I do not like Range Rovers. Being in the claws of this giant bird. So it's about retribution. Something coming back from the dead, or a mythic creature like the William Morris, and it's destroying this Range Rover.
So that image in particular we've just seen, and the fact that it's got this sort of steel band calypso music over it.
It's celebratory.
It's celebrating the demise of one of the symbols of elite, rich consumerism, yes?
Yes, sort of. I'm a cyclist. It's a very personal thing. Everything comes from a personal point. So All Greve came from watching that on TV as a teenager when I was doing my A-levels. That's why I got interested in that. So now, going ahead, I'm a cyclist in London, which means a lot of things, or can mean a lot of things. And the one car you fear more than any other is the Range Rover, because it's usually the people that drive it drive in a certain way, and it's very wide, and they're often on their phone, and they're often not taking any attention. I'm generalising now, but they're the cars you fear.
I'm getting a feel for your mindset, and I've led you down this path because I specifically now want to turn the tables on you in a way and say that for all of this sort of politicization, you know, the personal and political that you've woven into your work, you know, it has to be said from a left of centre perspective.
More or less, yes.
Yeah, okay. So that's what you brought to the table, and yet you are working in a world, the world of contemporary art,
Yes.
in which scores of millions of pounds slosh around, much of it going to successful artists like yourself, who work in collaboration with agents, collectors, dealers, in a cosy little system which makes everybody, frankly, very wealthy. So where does your left-wing perspective work in that?
Well, we're all part of this world, aren't we? The art world is really is a reflection on the wider world around us. You know, the art world isn't the only piece of corruption that goes on in the world.
Well, I'm not even saying it's corrupt. I'm just saying that you've bought into a world and you benefit from a world which is so far removed from the political messages that inhabit your work.
The art world isn't just one thing. It's not just super billionaires on yachts. The art world is like grassroots activity. There's many different art worlds, and I inhabit a few of them. I was a trustee of the Tate. You know, I'm part of the establishment.
Part of the establishment.
I'm absolutely part of the establishment. But that doesn't mean you have to kowtow to the ideas of certain people who come and go in the art world, basically. The art has always been about power, always. Look at every famous artwork ever. I mean, it's either been made for a pope, it's made for a king, a prince, whatever. It's always people, the wealthy, love to be near art because it gives you a sacred power almost.
Has your success changed you, though? I mean, you say that, yeah, I'm part of this world, but only in a very specific sense. But there's a great quote from Grayson Perry again in his recent lectures where he talked about the Picasso napkin syndrome, where an artist becomes so successful that they realise even just literally writing their signature on something gives it a value. And, you know, you've actually reached that status. You're famous.
I'm almost at napkin status.
Yeah, so has that actually been corrosive?
It could be. I don't think it has yet. You'd have to ask other people. I think I've kind of kept a level head. I mean, I don't sell a lot of work, I don't make tons of money, and I don't have that sort of production ethic. So...
I mean, you've slagged off others, maybe contemporaries or near contemporaries of yours, like Damien Hirst, who you say, and I'm quoting direct from you...
You just come up.
Yeah, well, Hirst, you said he had it and then he lost it. He's a massive failure, because he was onto something and he let it slip. The reason? He realised he could make money out of repetition.
Yeah, I mean, that happened to Warhol as well. I think he sort of let it go. And I think that's true, because he obviously started as a very interesting artist, and that it hasn't progressed. The only thing that's progressed is the amount of money that he can make.
Before we end, I want to look at the work that you're actually touring with right now in the UK, and that's a fascinating exhibition. I think you've called it All That Is Solid Melts Into Air.
Yes.
But what it seems to me it really is as much a fascinating insight into the social history of the 19th century in the UK and the Industrial Revolution as it is art in the traditional sense. Let's bring up a photo and then we can talk about this and what it means.
This is an emblematic photo in the exhibition. It's a photo I've used a lot in the past and will use in the future. For me, this is the most important photograph taken after the war in Britain.
Because?
Because it shows what is happening in Britain. It's showing all the tensions and changes in British society. It's showing us going from an industrial culture to a culture that's based on entertainment, on services, on creativity. And
the reason it works is because of the link. The man on the left is a traditional miner whose son, man on the right, Adrian Street, became a professional wrestler because after going down the mine, he realised this was no life for him. At 16 years of age, he ran away to London and eventually joined this world of bizarre entertainment.
Yeah.
And went back home one day.
He went back home specifically for a Sunday newspaper in 1973. They said, "Where would you like to be photographed?" He said, "I want to go back to the pit," basically to show those men behind him who used to beat him up in the pit, and his father who also used to beat him up, what he'd made of his life. So it's a kind of revenge photograph.
And a father who looks so tense, so uncomfortable, so confused.
Absolutely. It's like, what have I done? I mean, who is this person? But also, his father's looking at the future, really. It's like someone from the future has come to show these industrial people what the world is going to be like, and you're not going to be part of it almost. You know, this is it. I am the future. I always see it something like, almost like something out of William Blake, for Jerusalem.
But you see, I find that fascinating because, again, I suppose we're going to end the interview almost where we began, with a discussion of sort of the concept of art and what it means. As you talk to me about why you were so moved and taken with this photograph, I'm fascinated by what you're telling me, but I'm thinking you're really acting more as a curator would.
Yeah. I am.
Than an artist. Is that the way you're moving?
It's one way I'm moving, but I like to move in different places at different times. But I love being around art. I love working with art, and I like mixing art with other things and doing that. I'm not a very conventional curator because I don't have the academic rigour that curators often have, or the theory. I'm more instinctive. So a lot of curators will look at that photograph and maybe not see what I see. You know, I see this is like a history of the UK, basically, in this one photograph. The thing about Adrian is he's still alive and he still wrestles as well, and I've made a film about him. I mean, he's an amazing person. He's an incredible person, and he's a force of nature. And so I suppose I get a whole picture, but I just see many things, and I see sort of like historical antecedents, like I said, with art history and stuff.
We've interviewed lots of artists on this programme, but I don't think I've ever interviewed an artist who's used so many different media to get his sort of perspective on life across, you know, from drawn image to photographic image to what you call, I think, or some have called social sculpture, using real people. Obviously, you use music a lot. That's important to you.
Film.
I just wonder, as you look forward to your next projects, what medium means the most to you? Where is the power?
The power is, without sounding like a cliche now, or a song title, the power is in people, I think, in human beings, working with people and working with people's minds almost. Putting an idea out there and people knowing about the idea, having it in their minds, and the idea staying within them. So I think working with the public and working in the public is what I like to do the most. So that's something I'll be doing.
And will you continue, final point, you know, we talked a bit about politics. I just wonder, as you talk about the power of people, whether sometimes you're constrained by your politics, whether the message that you want to deliver gets in the way of being truly open to as many different people and as many different media as possible.
I don't think so, because I think the way I present work is in a way that it's actually quite neutral. I mean, that painting, for example, of the bird with the Range Rover, anyone can appreciate that. It's a skillful painting, but also the messages behind it, I feel, are universal. I did a project a few years ago when I took a car that had been destroyed in Baghdad around the US on the back of a trailer. It was on display all the time. And I went with an American soldier and I went with an Iraqi citizen, and we just turned up in towns in the south, in slightly tricky places potentially, and spoke to the public about this destroyed car. And it was the most amazing experience I've ever had in my life. And that you could see that as a very dangerous, very political...
And it wasn't specifically anti-war or anti the Iraq War.
It was about the Iraq War, but it was like taking something from a museum out and touring it around, this relic almost, for people to look at. And that, you know, obviously I had my opinion about that war, but we didn't foist opinions on people. We wanted to hear what people thought about this car. And a lot of them had served in Iraq and Vietnam, and they were very interested in it. And we had an amazing response. We didn't get thumped once, which was
so in a way, it's art as the starter of debate and conversation. It's all about the response.
It is, and that was definitely about conversations and about provoking conversations which were not party political, which were about this thing that America had got itself into.
Jeremy Deller, it's been a pleasure having you on Hardtalk. Thank you very much indeed.
Steve.
Thank you very much.